happy Thanksgiving break. So as promised, here is your little video about Heart of Darkness, and I'm sitting in my library. It's our office, but got a little rocking chair, so that's nice. Okay, so hopefully this will not take too long if I don't get carried away with myself and bore the pants off of everybody. So, we talked on Thursday, I think, when we actually had people in class about the introduction to Heart of Darkness and the way that Conrad sets atmosphere. He does this specifically through repetition, using words like brooding gloom over and over again, 5 times in the first 3 pages. We know that we have a frame story. We know that we have 5 guys on a yacht in the Thames in London, England, and they're waiting for a river flood to subside so that they can continue down their pleasure cruise, basically. Now, one thing that I don't know that I specifically mentioned was the fact that we have the director, we have an accountant, we have, what else do we have? The lawyer, our narrator, who we don't know much of anything about, and then we have Marlowe. Notice only one of them has a name, and as you know, naming gives power. Naming gives significance. So Marlowe becomes our conduit from the frame story to the main story. And Marlowe just kind of says random things like, and this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. That's a really odd moment to come out of nowhere, because the narrator, it seems, at the bottom of page 2, was thinking about all of these wonderful moments in civilization that have happened. It says, about 2/3 of the way down on page 2, the tidal current runs to and fro from its unceasing service, crowded with memories of men and ships it had borne to the rest of home or to the battles of the sea. It had known and served all the men of whom the nation is proud, from Sir Francis Drake to Sir John Franklin, knights all titled and untitled. And so, down at the very bottom of this page it says, hunters for gold or pursuers of fame, they all had gone out on that stream, bearing the sword and often the torch, messengers of the might within the land, bearers of a spark from the sacred fire. What greatness had not floated on the ebb of that river into the mystery of an unknown earth, the dreams of men, the seeds of commonwealths, the germs of empires. Like really big, bombastic, idealistic, let's go make a civilization kind of stuff. And then, this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. So, in a way, Marlowe is drawing our attention to the fact that at one point, even England was uncivilized. So, it shows something about his character. So I want you to think about that. And then most of page 3 is about what the narrator thinks of Marlowe. So then we have one of my favorite phrases in this section is on page 4. So he's talking about the flicker. They live in the flicker. And notice all this talk about light and darkness. Heart of Darkness being the title is kind of important. But it says, we live in the flicker, may it last as long as the old earth keeps rolling, but darkness was here yesterday. So it seems as though Marlowe has almost idea similar to God, that, you know, time passes in an instant. And then on page 4, back to my quote, the bottom of that paragraph, it says, land in a swamp, march through the woods, and in some inland post feel the savagery, the utter savagery that has closed round him, all that mysterious life of the wilderness that stirs in the forest, in the jungles, in the hearts of wild men. There's no initiation either into such mysteries. He has to live in the midst of the incomprehensible, which is also detestable. It has a fascination, too, that goes to work upon him, the fascination of the abomination. When I think about chapter 1, I give it the little subtitle in my head, The Fascination of the Abomination. And I think this is important because it demonstrates that desire within all of us to look at what we're not supposed to look at. Whether it's ugly or whether it's uncivilized or whether it's wrong or, passing a car accident on the road, everybody turns to look. Because we want to see, in the same way that even Ilyich wanted to recognize that death existed but wasn't something that was going to happen to him. I think there's a similar strain here. So the fascination of the abomination. What abominations are you fascinated with is something to think about. So, page 5 and 6 I think are interesting because this is our conduit into the actual story itself. He talks about himself as a child, which is kind of weird. We've got this guy who's very thin and kind of sickly looking, sitting like a Buddha on this ship's prow, and it's getting dark, and everyone's just listening to him pretty much because they don't have anything else to do. They're too lazy to get out the dominoes. And so Marlowe starts telling the story about when he was a little boy, he had a passion for maps. And that's, I think, something that's pretty attractive to a lot of people. But he looks at these maps and he thinks, oh, I want to be an explorer, I want to be an adventurer. On page 5, down at the bottom, he says, when I would put my finger on it and say, when I grow up, I will go there. The North Pole was one of these places, I remember. Well, I hadn't been there yet and shall not try now. The glamour's off. And so that tells us that whatever happens to him means that attraction, that fascination, is not as strong as it used to be. But then it says, there was one yet, the biggest, the most blank, so to speak, that I had a hankering after. And of course that's Africa. When we're talking about when Marlowe was a child, 1850s, 60s, 70s, people didn't know much about what was going on, and then it was over the 1870s and 80s that countries were going into Africa, colonizing, and trying to turn a profit. So at the bottom, page 5, it introduces once again the idea of darkness. It had ceased to be a blank space of delightful mystery, a white patch for a boy to dream gloriously over. It had become a place of darkness. But there was in it one river especially, a mighty river that you could see on the map, resembling an immense snake uncoiled, with its head in the sea, its body at rest, curving afar over a vast country, and its tail lost in the depths of the land. And I looked at the map of it in a shop window. It fascinated me as a snake would a bird, a silly little bird. So what you should be recognizing now is that there's a parallel journey going on, that currently Marlowe is on the Thames, but he's talking about his journey down the Congo. And that imagery of the snake is always symbolic, and it's biblical, obviously. And so the snake is seductive, it's drawing him in. And this is the river, this is Africa, this is savagery, this is everything in kind of setting our atmosphere and creating some dramatic tension in the beginning of the novel. I want to talk about Breslevin for just a minute, which is at the bottom of page 6. I think he's a really important introductory character who we meet, even though we don't really meet him because he's already dead. So the reason that Marlowe gets this job is A, because of his connections. His aunt wants him to have whatever he wants to have, and so she calls around until she finds him a position. And then the reason he gets the position is because the guy who was just doing the job has now died. So it says at the bottom of page 6, I got my appointment, of course, I got it very quick. It appears that the company had received news that one of their captains had been killed in a scuffle with the natives. So I want you to pay attention to how Conrad describes the natives. I generally try to use the word Africans. I sometimes say natives. He sometimes uses Negroes or even the other N word, along with some other descriptions that come along in another few pages. So just keep in mind how that the words he chooses and the connotations of those words and how those affect you, the reader. So Breslevin was Danish, and it says that he was very calm at first. It says that Breslevin was the gentlest, quietest creature that ever walked on 2 legs. No doubt he was, but he'd been a couple of years already out there engaged in the noble cause, and had probably felt the need at last of asserting his self-respect in some way. Therefore he whacked the old nigger mercilessly, while a big crowd of people watched him thunderstruck, until someone struck him with a spear in between the shoulder blades. So what's important here is to recognize what Fresleven's character was acknowledged to be before going into the Congo, and then what happens to him, which is so uncharacteristic of him. But it's almost like Marlowe forgives that, because it's to be assumed that one is, it's normal to go crazy in the wild. There's also the phrasing of the noble cause, which I want to talk about with the aunt, who on page 10 talks about, bottom of 9, top of 10, how she perceives his work as being this important work, something like an emissary of light, something like a lower sort of apostle. And then she talked about weaning those ignorant millions from their horrid ways. So obviously, both Fresleven in The Noble Cause and the aunt have this Rudyard Kipling idea of the white man's burden. Now, the aunt is described as, it's queer how out of touch with truth women are. So she's just sort of brushed aside. Fresleven, however, engages, goes into the darkness, goes into the burden, and ends up killed. So think about what the impact that has. And also notice that Marlowe himself doesn't fully believe in the whole idea of the white man's burden, because it says that I ventured to hint that the company was run for profit. So he doesn't seem as enamored with the idea, but that doesn't mean he's totally immune. Okay, so then as he gets the appointment, he has to go to see the doctor, right? Pages 7 and 8 talk about these two women who were knitting black wool. And you'll notice that this is not a very long novel, and so if he spends a page and a half talking about these two women, there's got to be something there. I want you to kind of come to your own ideas there, but I also wanted to tell you that on page 8 there's a phrase in Latin, which I'm going to attempt to say, Ave morituri te salutant, which is, hail, those who are about to die salute you. Just think on that for a minute. Those who are about to die salute you. And then there's the doctor, who's an interesting little fella. Page 9, you talk about how he questions Marlowe, and he says, I always ask leave in the interests of science to measure the crania of those going out there, he asked. And when they come back too, I asked. Oh, I never seen them, and moreover, the changes take place inside, you know. So all of this is foreshadowing, right? It's foreshadowing that something is going to happen to Marlowe. If he returns, he will be different. We don't know how. I'll pay special attention to the advice that he gives him. In the tropics, one must, before everything, keep calm. Du calme, adieu. Stay calm. Don't do what Fresleven did. Don't lose your temper. If you lose your temper, you lose your life. Losing your temper, keep your civilization, make sure everything is as normal as you can make it. Okay. Let's see. We talked about the emissary of light. Oh, okay. So the first description of the Africans, oh wait, no, page 10, bottom page 10, there's a really interesting description of the way that the river runs up against the shore, and think about that as a dichotomy as well. Savagery, civilization, white, black, all of this stuff. And again, the description, dense, but really, really good. Okay, and then on page 11, we get to the description of the natives. He talks about a boat that he sees. It was paddled by black fellows. You could see from afar the whites of their eyeballs glistening. They shouted and sang. Their bodies streamed with perspiration. They had faces like grotesque masks, these chaps. But they had bone, muscle, a wild vitality, and intense energy of movement that was as natural and true as the surf along their coast. So everything about that description is physical. It's not in any way intellectual. It's not in any way civilized. Their faces are like grotesque masks. Think about how that phrasing hits you and what you think of it. Okay, now we're almost done. Pages 12, 13, and 14, we get into a really intense description of the natives. And it's kind of hard to read, but I think it's important. So first of all, they're described as looking like ants, and then they're building a railway, and then we have at the bottom of page 12 this clinking sound and the 6 black men advancing in a file, toiling up the path. Black rags were wound round their loins, and the short ends behind waggled to and fro like tails. I could see every rib. The joints of their limbs were like knots in rope. Each had an iron collar on his neck, and all were connected together with a chain whose bight swung between them, rhythmically clinking. Again, everything is physical. It does seem that they're criminals or prisoners in some way, but it even goes beyond the physical into making them animalistic with the tails. And there's nothing individual about them. This could be in part Marlowe's sense of being overwhelmed, of being in this place, or it could not. So think about that. What do you think? But at the bottom of page 13, it talks about what they're doing. They're digging a hole. What's the hole for? Nobody knows. And it says it could be some philanthropic desire of giving the criminals something to do. I don't know. I'm sure that most of you have seen or read holes. Think about how productive that is, to just get men to do something and to dig a hole. Page 14 talks about some different men, and the dehumanization seems to go even further here. They're black shapes, bones, grotesque figures, shadows of disease and starvation. But there's one who's wearing a piece of white worsted around his neck. Worsted is a type of wool, and it says why? Where did he get it? Was it a badge, an ornament, a charm, a propitiatory act? Was there any idea at all connected with it? It looks startling around his black neck, this bit of white thread from beyond the seas. He's wearing this piece of thread that has been processed, that's used for a gentleman's clothing. He's black, he's wearing this piece of white thread, and it really shocks Marlowe. Why is he wearing it? What is it for? Where did it come from? And then page 15, we meet the accountant. Think about how different the accountant is. What's the point of the contrast? What does Marlowe seem to respect about the accountant? It says, in the great demoralization of the land, he kept up his appearance. So is he demonstrating some sort of respect for his civilization, or is he mocking him in a way? Both are possible. What do you think? And then the accountant mentions Mr. Kurtz, who is a first-class agent who sends in more ivory than all of the other stations put together. And so he's at this station that's deep in the heart of the country. And the whole idea is that Marlowe is going to get a boat, go to Kurtz's station to get ivory, and that's going to be his job. So, that's pretty much the first 16 pages. I I hope that that gives you some things to kind of think about as you're reading along. I know that it's dense. I know that it's a little bit stream of consciousness. This is not the most stream of consciousness thing that we're going to read this year, but you know, I know that it's difficult, so take your time. I hope that by the time you read this, you watch this, you've had a chance to read over it, and so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've gone, a good 10 minutes over what I intended, but I hope this was valuable to you, and I look forward to seeing you guys in a week, hopefully a little bit fatter, having some good Thanksgiving food. So enjoy your vacation. I'm enjoying mine. Take care. See you soon.